I have a FigJam table here with the 14 main types of onboarding design patterns, and this is from analyzing over 200 onboarding flows from the world's best apps. And I'm going to show you what they are and how you can use them to enhance your product's user experience. So here we are inside of FigJam, and here's our table. And you'll see that I have all of the patterns listed here on the left, and then a definition of what it is, followed by the best use case where this is appropriate, pros, cons, the UI elements that you need, and real working examples. Now, if you want a copy of this table for yourself, there is a link to get that in the description below. I also have a Notion table here with all of these onboarding patterns listed, and I've also included that in the download in the description so that you can add this to your Notion workspace and be able to sort and filter. And I have these also tagged with app types, so if you are, let's say, working on a SaaS app, you can come up here, search SaaS, and you'll see that I've tagged the ones that are most commonly used in those types of apps. And I also have a gallery view here so you can see everything at a glance and all of the examples that I've added. So first up, we have First Look. Now, this is one that you've probably seen a lot, and this is when a user first signs up or first logs into your app, and it usually takes the form of a modal that has some slides in it or maybe a highlight reel video. So let's take a look at some examples. Here we have an intercom carousel, and this is the design pattern that you'll most likely see and the UI elements in this component. So you might have a title. You'll definitely have a way to close the modal, and you'll notice that it sits on top of the application where the application is grayed out in the background so that this is in focus. And you'll see that there are a number of slides. Sometimes there'll be dots, there'll be a progress bar, something to show how many slides there are, and maybe a next button. And this one has an embedded video in it as well, so you can combine them. But this is an example of your First Look onboarding pattern. The use cases you're going to see this a lot in are productivity and collaboration apps. Think Slack and Notion, creativity tools like Adobe and Canva, and even complex SaaS like HubSpot and Airtable. Especially with the video here, this is going to help your users get a high-level overview of the workflow and the workspace. So it's really good when you have products like that. Now, you may also see it in this storyboard style format like Matter has here. And this is just a visual walkthrough telling you a little bit about the problem, the struggle, the goal, or whatever story that you want to communicate with your users. And it even embeds this little self-selection survey, which we'll talk more about in another pattern. And then Amplitude is another example here with an embedded video. So that is our First Look onboarding pattern. Next, we have Product Tour. Now, this one is a step-by-step guide that points out the core features of the product, and it usually involves overlays and pop-ups over the interface that guide the new user around the interface in like a set order or a sequence. So we see one here from Intercom, and let's take a closer look at these. So in this example, you can see that when you arrive into the interface or the workspace, there are going to be certain parts, certain components of this workspace that are highlighted, and it's going to call out what you can do in that part or what you can find or what this feature is about. And sometimes that is just one tooltip, or sometimes it's a carousel like we have here. Now, this is really great for analytics and data heavy platforms. Like think of Google Analytics and Amplitude, for example. Really feature rich project management tools like Asana or ClickUp, and SaaS interfaces like Intercom and Salesforce. It's just really great if you have like a lot of features, and it can be very confusing if a user were to just jump in there cold turkey. And so this really provides a guided first experience and kind of structured help. Number 3 is the walkthrough beacons. Now, this one is similar to the one that we saw before, but what you'll notice are the actual glowing indicators in the interface. So the user isn't initially pushed through it, but they have the option to click on it because this beacon is drawing their attention. So I'll give you a live example of that. Here in Simple Website Builder, there's this beacon, and it's not going to highlight that component or that section and force me to check it out until I click it. So I can sort of ignore it if I want to, but when I do click it, then it highlights that, it brings up this tooltip, and it takes me through that tour. It launches me into that. And I click next, it takes me to the next item, next, the next item, so on and so forth. And if I click off of this, the beacon is somewhere else where I left off so that I can kind of explore that when I'm ready. So the UI elements here, you're gonna see that small pulsating dot. You'll see a popover with a tooltip and a brief message. And this often has like just that subtle animation that kind of catches your eye without feeling too in your face. And so you'll see this a lot in website building tools like Simple or Webflow, design and editing apps like Figma and Canva, and any apps where you kind of need to be paying attention to a certain thing, like in Shopify or maybe Squarespace, where you want to introduce some new features. I like this one because it really does provide gentle nudges in the right places without like making the app feel locked down, or that you have to go through this walkthrough before you can continue exploring. Number 4, empty state. So this is when the user sees an illustration or some instruction where there is no content, where they haven't entered any content or data in yet. Tally is an example here. So when you're creating a form, if you don't have any forms yet, there's a little illustration, there are some instructions, and there's a call to action button here of what you can do, and that will launch you into your first task of creating a form. You'll see this a lot in productivity apps like Trello and Notion, or task and project management apps like Todoist and Monday, and anything that relies on user-generated content, like you might have Pinterest. So when you need to show someone how to create their first piece of content, this is a great way to initiate that interaction. Next, personalization. Now, this is a quick way to gather user preferences and choices so that the product experience can adapt to them. So we're personalizing it, we're tailoring it. This is things like picking your favorite topics or categories or interests. You see this here in Reddit. After you've created your account, you see these interest chips that you can select. There's, different categories, and then you click on the ones you want, and then you can even set up your avatar. So there's a little gamification aspect here too. And then this is really going to set you up for a more tailored experience when you get into the app. So the UI components you might see here are, it could be a short form with checkboxes or a drop down to select items. It could be selection chips like we have here in Reddit. You can have a progress bar there to show the user how many more pages there are of options. Maybe customization options like sliders or toggles, or picking themes or categories, or avatar creation. You'll see this a lot in social media apps, Reddit, TikTok, news and media aggregators, or streaming platforms. And this is very helpful when you want to show users only what matters to them when they get into the app. Next, we have checklists. This is a simple list of tasks that the user needs to complete to get fully set up. So each item is typically going to be a task and an action that they need to take, and they can see the progress as they go. An example here would be Front. There is a setup guide to help you set up the basics. So first they want you to set up a shared inbox, then understand your inboxes in your channels. And as you go through these and complete these items, they're going to be checked off, let you know that they're completed, and you can see your progress. So you're going to see this in account setup heavy apps like accounting software like QuickBooks, or productivity apps like Slack. Anything where there's a lot of setup involved, like making a Shopify store or a CRM integration. So it really presents these steps in an actionable way, and it's concrete and trackable, and it kind of gives the user that feeling of progress as they complete them. 7 is action oriented. Now, this is similar to the checklist, but this pattern prompts users to do a specific key action instead of just reading about a feature or checking something off. It really is about this hands-on engagement from the start. So an example of that here is Copilot, and you're going to see that it's asking you here to create a test client. So it's almost like a little challenge or a test, because in order for you to complete this, you have to go through the entire process of creating a test client. And when you've successfully done that, then it will be checked off, and it will give you a success message to tell you if you've done it right, or help you along the way to complete this challenge. So this is kind of like a nested workflow creation process. It's a little bit more detailed and nuanced than just a simple checklist. And you're going to see these a lot in things like Google Docs, Dropbox Paper, Loom, Grammarly. When there's like a primary action that really shows off why the product is worthwhile, because you know that that's going to help them get to that result faster. So some of the UI components that you're going to see here are at bold CTA, very clear, direct language of do this thing, send your first message now. Tiny nudges or labels inside the interface as the user is trying to complete that to get them to finish that action-oriented task. And then, that celebratory moment of completion. Now, you may have noticed as I have been pulling up these examples and going through them, that I have a very wide selection of these onboarding types, and that's because I used Mobbin to do my research. I rave about them because I use them so much day to day as a product designer. I don't have to install every single app and create an account myself and try them because Mobbin has done that for me. They categorize and catalog all of this onboarding stuff so that I can go through them and search. And I can search by UI component, I can search by the flow, the screen type, and I can search mobile or web. Now, this is incredible because it's curating all of these design patterns from the best apps in the world, and they're also often videos and prototypes that you can click through as well. And not only that, but I often bring these into Figma with their Figma plugin so that I can kind of work with them and study them a little more closely and then incorporate them into my own designs. I really encourage you to click on the link in the description so that you can try Mobbin out, because you might want to look up the flows of other design patterns, and you can do that so easily. So please check it out and let me know what you think. Number 8 is goal setting. This is a pattern where you help users define a goal, like a weekly target, and then track their progress and encourage them to stick with it. So you probably have seen this in Duolingo or similar learning type apps. And let's take a look at that. So right here, you can see that it's quite gamified. You are going to set up your learning goal here. You're going to commit to a streak, and you're going to see that progress as you complete these tasks. So there are a number of ways to do this, but usually it's going to be you're selecting something either from a drop down, or you're going through this process and it's going to ask you questions. Maybe it's like a survey style, and you're going to select something, and then it's going to customize it as you go. And that's what's happening here in Duolingo. And then you're going to just continue this process step by step. And so again, you're going to see this a lot in learning and education platforms, fitness and wellness apps, habit tracking, personal development, anything like that. Anything where the product relies on repeated usage. And also in any scenario where you can clearly measure success over time. Number 9 is coach marks. Now, this is a little bit like beacons, but these are small pointers or highlights around different parts of the UI, and each of those offer a short description or explanation. So you want to kind of think of these as like digital sticky notes on buttons or sections, and they're sort of there when and if the user needs it. So it's not necessarily a guided walkthrough. It's not necessarily a beacon that's always calling for your attention, but it's like, if I need to understand this feature, it's there for me. Canva does a great job of this. You'll see it here when you go to text. Maybe if this is your first time ever clicking this text button, then you're going to see this little tooltip with a tour and maybe some guidance on how to use text. And this one is even more guided because it's going to have you add the text and then complete that. It wants to make sure that you can and have done it before it clears that tooltip for you. This is presenting in full screen. Maybe if you've never clicked that button before, this is your first time exploring that feature, there's going to be a tooltip there for you. Again, this is great for creative software, design tools, Canva, Photoshop, apps that have new features that are introduced regularly. One of those cases where I talked about in my other video in onboarding best practices, where they don't need to be there just for the first login. It can be presented the first time a user explores a feature. This is like nurturing onboarding over time. Number 10 is demo content. This is when you give a sample set of data or a sample demo project that people can play with to get a sense of how the interface or the workspace works without having to upload or create something from scratch. A lot of times this is like data analytics tools, editing tools like video editing. So Frame is an example of this. When you land into your account, there's a demo project. So when you click on it, you're able to see how things are set up, mess around with it without feeling like you're going to destroy anything. It's just really helpful, especially for visual learners who want to see an example. Number 11 is the simulation. Now, this is an interactive or recorded demonstration that shows the product in action under realistic conditions. It's kind of like a mock version. Intercom does this when you're setting up a chatbot and you want to see how it works. It prompts you to give the messenger a try in this demo so you can chat with it with your bot, and it's no one else is going to see it but you. And you can see how it works and if it responds the way that you want to. So that's what we mean by a simulation. And the UI elements here recreate this thing that the user is setting up as close to what their users are going to see as possible. So you want to make it realistic, but you also want to give guidance. So here, you can tell that you're inside of a tutorial mode, and this is like your testing or your playground. So we see this a lot in customer support tools like Intercom and Zendesk, collaborative software like Zoom and Slack, and SaaS platforms like Salesforce. So if your product is quite complex and the customer is having to further customize it for their end user, then these real scenario showcases can benefit that rather than just static walkthroughs or tooltips or text. I love nerding out about this stuff inside the course I teach with my students because they're all in there designing onboarding flows like this for the real MVP products that they're creating and building their case studies on for their portfolio. So if you're interested in doing something like that with me, with my one-on-one mentorship inside of our amazing Mindful Design community, then check out the link to my course in the description. I'd love to have you as a student, so please do check it out. Number 12 is self-segmentation. This is pretty common, and it's when it asks the user to pick a path or a user type or to identify in some way that best describes them. So Notion does this. It might be something like I'm a teacher or I'm a student so that the onboarding flow can be further tailored. So looking at this in Notion, here's a perfect example. The UI elements here you'll often see are just, a screen. It could be a drop down. It could be these lovely visual cards here. And then you choose one of them that you identify with. And as you continue, then your workspace is loaded up with demo content here, a simulation, beacons, a walkthrough. So you can combine these now in a way that guides that particular user type through the process. So maybe you'll load up a template that is for personal use or for students. And so this keeps the rest of the workspace very tailored to them. Again, you'll see this in a lot of multi-purpose productivity tools, in enterprise tools, in educational software, business apps that serve various groups like HubSpot or MailChimp. So if your product serves multiple users or multiple distinct needs, start by, only feeding them relevant features. Number 13 is contextual tooltips. Pop-up tips that appear exactly when users hover or click on something that might need more explanation. They show up at the moment of need rather than covering the screen. This is very similar to coach marks, but this might only happen when the user is in a specific workflow. So for example here, maybe you've set up some sort of a group team collaboration, and it may not show these quick actions to you if you're just doing a solo project. So maybe you don't need to add a view for other collaborators, but if you do, this maybe quick action panel will appear with buttons. Actual actions inside the interface are both presented in a tailored way and also include tooltips. So this is that just-in-time rule, the right place at the right time that I talked about in my onboarding practices video in part 1. So those UI components you're going to see are like small boxes with a sentence or two, like an arrow or a pointer. It might be inside an embedded navigation that isn't always present for everyone. This is really great for really complex tools, data visualization, dashboards, SaaS applications that have like a lot of hidden or secondary features. Think, Trello and Airtable. They kind of provide that just-in-time bite-sized info. Number 14 is a just-in-time modal. Now, this is something that might appear exactly when it's relevant. Again, these are all getting quite similar and a little bit granular here in terms of the difference, but this is really relevant if someone is doing something for the first time and you need a bigger, deeper explanation. So it's a little bit more than a tooltip. So maybe if I'm clicking on save an image for the first time, let's say there are a couple of steps, maybe I want to compress that image and then choose a specific export type. And so there might be a short setup prompt here. Miro does this, Canva does this too. This is an example in Miro. So when you go to save an image, it's going to ask you, do you want to save a high-res image, export a frame, like how do you want to do it? And then it's going to coach you through that or give you the options. So it's just letting you know, hey, there are all of these different ways to export this. And so you can explore that. And number 15 is a little bonus because this can be and is often combined with a lot of these different onboarding patterns. And this is just information gathering. This is when there is a lot of upfront, front-loaded info collection, such as in a finance app, usually because they need to input enough information for this user to be able to give you what you need. So let's take Acorns, for example. Acorns requires that they understand whether you're an investor or not. You need to set up security questions. Some of these are legal requirements. The other thing is that you need to set up a bank account. So anything that has these third-party connections where you have to sync things or link things, this is going to be that thing where they need a lot of upfront info from you. Otherwise, the app is just not going to have anything to provide you. And so these are going to be more extensive account setup type onboarding flows. And you might find that this happens right before your initial introduction to the product. It might be a part of it. It might be really long. It might be really short. So that's why this one's kind of a bonus. You'll see these in, accounting, finance, HR, maybe even e-commerce personalization like Etsy, recommendation engines, anything where lots of preferences or setup is required. These are really the main ones that work really well and are very effective at engaging users. Now, there's so much more that I covered in part 1 of this video of onboarding practices. A lot of these can be combined depending on your users' behaviors or their preferences. And the real challenge is knowing how and when to use these. And for that, you really need to understand the golden rule of user onboarding and the 3 main elements that make for a successful user experience. And if you want to learn all about that, then watch this video next.